Hodgepodge, a heterogeneous mixture, a jumble, or when it comes to professional wrestling, two singles wrestlers who get jammed together when creative has nothing else to do with them. Which WWE does seemingly way too often. Now, a lot of fans of tag team wrestling absolutely hate this practice, especially when these odd couple tag teams end up winning tag team gold, since this just makes the entire tag division look like an afterthought where you can stick your leftovers, instead of making it a competitive and thriving roster unto itself. But hodgepodges aren't necessarily all that bad, as they can be pretty exciting on occasion. So I figure why not take this time to look back at the best of the odd bunch, because today... Thank you so much for the support over on Patreon to Baba Yaga. Before we begin, let's go over the rules to see what actually constitutes as a hodgepodge in my opinion, which is actually probably the hardest part of this entire thing. Now, for my own personal definition, a tag team is disqualified from being a hodgepodge if they fit any of the following criteria. First, they cannot have a tag team name. A proper hodgepodge team moniker consists of nothing more than just both wrestlers' names joined together by the word "and". So if you just take two singles wrestlers, slap them together, and give them a cute and clever name, well, they stop qualifying as a hodgepodge in my book. Therefore, teams like Money Inc., the Arkansas Connection, and the Brothers of Destruction don't count as a rando team for me. But speaking of brothers, blood relatives, kayfabe or otherwise, don't qualify here either. So, Ole and Arn, despite not actually being related, don't count since they are blood relatives in story mode. Also, Goldust and Stardust are not a hodgepodge because they are real-life kin, even if they didn't come out being introduced as the Rhodes Brothers. Lastly, a team is disqualified from hodgepodgery if they have matching outfits, or at least very similar outfits, a unique entrance song or Titantron video that was made just for them as a duo. A real mashup of two singles wrestlers just has them wearing the same thing that they wore when they were singles wrestlers, and just coming down to the ring with the same exact songs that they had individually as singles wrestlers. Or worse yet, they both come out together to the same song, but it's the song of whichever of the two was more popular. However, the one exception to this is when they're both part of the same faction, especially if the faction is particularly huge. As personally, I do think that a hodgepodge can still happen within a greater group. The logic here is, for example, when Buddy Murphy won the tag titles with Seth Rollins, I still count them as a mismatched tag team, even though they were in the same faction. And hey, these are my rules, so that's how I'm gonna count it. But that does remind me, one last thing before we get into it, I want to remind everyone that this is my opinion. It's my own personal list, so don't go crying in the comments section, why didn't you include this team? Why didn't you include that team? Well, obviously it's because I don't like them as much as the 7 I'm putting here. Duh. This one may not be an obvious one for many of you out there, but if you were around during the boom period, you definitely remember this odd couple pairing within the NWO. Now sure, they were both in the same faction, but as I already specified, that doesn't count. Now what's really weird about this duo is that unlike the other teams on this list, the two of them never won tag team gold, and they barely ever wrestled together as a team in the first place, spending most of their time together with Buff merely accompanying Steiner to his matches, usually just in order to give Bagwell something to do while he was dealing with an injury. So in that case, what is this team doing here? Well, truth be told, I really just found them very entertaining together. Up until this point, Buff had been on a steady rotation of tag partners in WCW, usually with him playing the part of the fun one while his partner was the more serious wrestler, like with Scotty Riggs or Scott Norton, the latter of which was also an NWO member who was playing up his strength as the vicious part of the Vicious and Delicious tag team with Bagwell. However, I guess third time was the charm, as the Scott hat trick of Steiner being the muscle was the tag partner who was just right for Buff Daddy. Plus, at this time, Bagwell's goofy persona had really come into its own and was at its total peak. So in the end, were they a great tag team? No, but that doesn't mean they can't still be one of my favorites, which they are. Cactus Jack and Chainsaw Charlie. Alright, so here we have a more successful tag team. Not all that much more since they only held the tag belts for a day before they had to relinquish it, but more successful nevertheless. I do have to point out that the team of Foley and Funk are just a natural fit together. Besides all of the history that the two men share together, they are also two really good friends, and they also do great work together. And they also did solid work against each other too. But that's gonna be something of a theme here, as you'll soon see. So, even though they may not be the most decorated duo, they are definitely two extreme peas in one extreme pod. British Bulldog and Owen Hart. Now remember, I specifically said that blood relatives do not count. So even though these two are family, they're related through marriage, therefore they still qualify as a hodgepodge team for this list. But as to why they're here in the first place, allow me to say that they definitely have to qualify here, because the two actually have one of the longest reigns ever with the WWF World Tag Team titles of nearly 250 days. And yes, the two would eventually be a part of the Hart Foundation stable, but I'm not talking about that run. I'm specifically referring to this exact run with the tag belts, when they were just known as Owen Hart and the British Bulldog. Now, the weirder thing to me is that as successful as the group was, they never tried to give them a tag team name like they did when the British Bulldog partnered up with Lex Luger and they were called the Allied Powers. But maybe that's for the best, because now I get to include them here today. Chris Benoit and Chris Jericho. Next up is the tag team of the two Chris's, Jericho and Benoit. What can I say? I just love me some Dungeon Graduates. And when you put two of them together, that is of course going to get my attention. And let me also point out that while he is known as a solo star, I will say that Chris Jericho really does do a lot whenever he's in a partnership. I chose the team of Benoit and Jericho above all else because of just how great these two were together. Not only does the Crippler add just as much to a team as Jericho does, but the two men were also really great at ladder matches, separately and together. So while they were both capable of putting on amazing ladder matches going against each other, they were also so good that they were even able to hold their own against the Hardys, Dudleys, and Edge and Christian in a TLC match, which is definitely no easy feat since those teams birthed that particular bout. And the last reason why this team is here is because I'm just a total sucker for that double submission spot that they used to do, where Jericho would put someone in the Lion Tamer while Benoit hooked them for the crossface at the exact same time. So even though this team doesn't get brought up all that much anymore for, well, obvious reasons, they still get brought up here today. Raven and Tommy Dreamer. Now this was one of my all-time favorite storylines. ECW's most dominant tag team, the Dudley Boys, were leaving for WWF. So who did they get to take the straps off of them? Well, the answer would be Tommy Dreamer and... well, we didn't know exactly who at first. But then, just as Dreamer was about to go about it solo, who should make his way down to the ring and win the tag titles for the two of them to create this brand new partnership? Well, it would be the man who Dreamer had spent 3 long years losing against. It was none other than his arch nemesis, the man they call Raven, freshly returned from his stint in WCW. And I'll tell you, nobody saw this coming. But then again, Raven was definitely the type of wrestler that always kept you guessing. And also, I have to say, the idea of two enemies having to work together was absolutely fantastic. But that leads me to Rob Van Dam and Sabu. Staying with the extreme for a moment, RVD and Sabu were the ultimate pairing of two ECW solo stars for many fans. They began as rivals, but in reality, the two were actually both trained by Sabu's uncle, the Sheik. But in storyline, Rob Van Dam and Sabu partnered up and started competing for the tag team titles in 1997. Now eventually, they did win the ECW World Tag Team titles, but that wasn't until after the pair picked up a couple of singles belts along the way, with Van Dam assisting in Sabu's win of the ECW World title off of Terry Funk, and with Sabu helping RVD pick up the World Television title from Bam Bam Bigelow. After this, the team would defeat Chris Candido and Lance Storm to finally become World Tag Team Champions. But even after all this happened, the two would still square off from time to time, culminating in a feud for the TV title where Sabu vowed that if he was unable to win the title at Guilty as Charged, he would leave the company. And when Rob Van Dam retained, the partnership was officially ended in ECW. However, they would still reunite here and there in other promotions. But as awesomely volatile as this relationship was, there is still yet one more to consider. Chris Benoit and Kurt Angle. And my absolute favorite hodgepodge tag team of all time, Chris Benoit and Kurt Angle. Now, yes, you probably noticed something of a pattern here, but I say that if you're going to force two singles wrestlers together, the best way to make them entertaining is to make them hate each other. Now, behind the scenes, Angle has mentioned that he feels that his best work was with Chris Benoit, but again, for obvious reasons, that doesn't get brought up all that much these days. But going back to earlier, as I said with Chris Jericho, Benoit brings a lot to a tag team whenever he's in it, which has been shown with his various tag team partners throughout the years, but none more so than Kurt Angle in my opinion. Now, these two wrestled against each other in some fantastic matches, but that in-ring chemistry also translated very well with them being on the same side too. And while in a lot of cases opposites attract, I say that their similarities is actually what made them a very good team. And then when it came to the storyline aspect, these two were constantly at odds with each other, which was easily one of my favorite tag team title reigns of the entire era. And remember, Benoit and Angle were also the first ever SmackDown Tag Team Champions, and that exact lineage still goes on to this day, but as the Raw tag straps. Go figure. Well, there you go, my 7 favorite hodgepodge tag teams. But what are some that you like? Let me know down in the comments, and if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, as it really does help this channel, as does subscribing. And while we're talking about helping out the channel, let me also take a time out to thank all of my wonderful Patreon supporters out there. Thank you so much for all of your help, and thank you for watching. And as always, Dave knows.